Hallo alles, willkommen zurück zu .NET API Review. Ich hoffe, dass du, no. Ich hoffe, du hat ein gutes Dezember und fröhliches neues Jahr. And yeah, 2025. Welcome officially, I think, to the future. It kind of looks the same as the past did. All right. Let's see if we get through all five things that we have today. First up, create OOB package for Rune, Unicode UTF8, and related APIs 529047.
Sure. So I think this was originally mine, so I'll just start talking. We introduced a bunch of APIs for working with Unicode data structures, specifically like UTF-8 sequences and scalar values, system text room, over the past few releases. And it turns out that some of our out-of-band packages, system text JSON, web encoders, and so on, could really use these APIs, and some of those packages have actually started duplicating the logic within those APIs. So we may as well just make them available out of band. That's kind of the spiel. Now, one thing that is, always a difficulty with making such things available out of band is like these APIs have been improving over the years, right? So the shape of the API was, small in .NET 6, grew in 7, 8, 9, and so on. So if we do make an out-of-band package, presumably we need to choose one of those releases to snapshot and say, here is the out-of-band package, and we can't really add APIs to it anymore once we do that, right?
So Rune shipped in core lib, right?
Yes.
Well, then you're kind of... So if you want to make it available as net standard 2, it basically means you're stuck with the API shape the first time it showed up in .NET Core.
Why the first time?
Because you can't, because .NET Standard is available for before that, right, usually. And so you can't have more APIs in the .NET Standard version than the first time you had it in box.
Well,
because we can't replace the inbox version.
I mean,
well,
we could argue.
.NET 6 and 7 are out of support right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say we could argue that we don't care about versions that are out of support, and it's allowed to be the.
I wouldn't do that game because it's basically you're saying you're binary incompatible, but because it's out of support, we don't care. I would not do that. Like, I mean, if we want to do that, I mean, we could probably make that work by saying when you reference the .NET Standard package from .NET 6, we failed the build with an error message or something and say, sorry, you can't use that thing on .NET Core at 6. Maybe that's the way to do it. But just purely from a binary compat standpoint, that's usually how that works. You just snapshot the earliest inbox version if the .NET Standard thing is supported before that.
I get it's out of support, but I also am would be annoyed that in my out of support project that I'm adding a BCL package or something that has like an out of support target, right? Like I'm adding a new package which is supposed to increase compatibility with like down level .NETs and then it would break me, like code that worked before. But I don't know. That's a tough one. Like,
yeah, I'm looking through the proposal right now, and the only thing that the proposal is really missing, because this proposal was made in 2021, and in .NET 8, which I remind everyone is the earliest in support version of .NET in market right now, or the oldest in support version. There's only one API that we added, and it's an API on a static type. What we could do is I think it's UTF-8 is valid. Given a byte sequence, it tells you if the sequence is valid or not as a UTF-8 representation. What we could do potentially to work around this is type forward absolutely everything else into corelib except for that one static type, and say that static type carries the implementation for all three members. It doesn't type forward unless you're on .NET 8. That work?
Well, I have to look at the specifics. I would generally say be careful with creative solutions because they tend to have problems when you consider in-place updates.
I mean, if it's a static class, so it can't be instantiated, then you're either calling the one from the package or you're not, and there's not an identity problem. An instantiable class has the type forward, but a static one could not.
Well,
I mean,
just out of curiosity,
yeah.
like what framework would we target? Like how does multi-targeting even work from this out-of-band package? Like we would target net standard and net 462 obviously, but what version of net core do we target?
So that's the question of who's the consumer, really, right? So like based on the comments in like very much at the bottom of this, which is why it was marked as ready for review, was a desire to use it from system text.json. So if we want to do that, then I would expect, I mean, the reason why you want to do that usually is because, or maybe there's an API in system text.json that takes Rune, let's say, right? So that would mean we would end up in a world where the Rune package is multi-targeted itself. It says it has .NET Standard 2. That's where the core types show up. And then maybe we are multi-targeting for the different flavors in order to give you more API exposure, right? And then this way you could be in system text.json, which again, it of itself is multi-targeted already. You could then say, yeah, you get to exchange types, but then if you want to call specific methods that were added in .NET 9, let's say, well, you just multi-target and you call into those, right? Like basically what we already do today, right? I would generally say if we, like for almost all loops we ship, there's the desire to make it work on .NET Framework. And my stance still is for any API that you want to work on both standard and core, you should still target net standard 2 to avoid that your consumers have to multi-target for those scenarios, right? But if you want more APIs, then you have to multi-target. That's just the way it goes, right? For things we can't make available, I should say, which is usually the case for partially inbox components because, well, at some point they were inbox and then we are limited by that API shape.
Yeah,
and yes,
so
we could play tricks with support.
So what system text JSON would have to do then is they would still, if this API weren't available, the is valid API, they would still have to duplicate the entire functionality of that.
Not necessarily. I mean, you have options. They can either decide to throw, they can decide to not support certain things. So it's not an all or nothing. Like you still get to decide on a per version basis what you want to do, right?
Let's see here.
So is the plan to update the system text JSON OOB to depend on this?
That was my understanding based on, because I think Eric had some statement in the bottom that says like, oh yeah, I wanted to use Rune for something, but I couldn't because it's not available.
Yeah, system text JSON, I'm looking at what system text JSON references, or sorry, targets. STJ targets net standard 2.0, net 462, net 8, and net 9.
Yeah.
Right, but in theory, right, so this is what's scary, right, is right now, if you run the latest system text JSON 9, whatever, right, on .NET 6, it works, right, because you use the net standard packages, or the net standard target.
Correct.
If it was to start to depend on this, and then it used an API that wasn't the oldest version, so say it matched the .NET 8 API, what happens? Okay, so let's say we do target like, you know, net framework, net standard, and whatever net cores we do to match system text JSON. Yeah, what happens with this package if it doesn't match the 6.0 API when you load its net standard build on 6? Like, does it blow up?
In theory, nothing, because net standard would carry its own implementation.
Okay.
So it wouldn't conflict at all with what's in box.
Yeah, well, even if they don't match, like even if the APIs don't match between.
I mean, it depends on what you do, right? So like if you say you're assuming, I mean, if you literally carry its own implementation, then you will end up in a world where the compiler sees the same type in two places. If you don't carry your own implementation and you unify with the inbox type, you might be in a world where the net standard thing has being able to compile against methods that don't exist, right? So then you get runtime exceptions with things not being there. And that's kind of why we said, like, if for those cases, you that's why you have to lock the API surface for the older framework to say you can't have more APIs in an older version, right? But then I think to Levi's point, right? If we truly want to say we don't want to optimize for effectively net 6, net 7 anymore, I mean, there's nothing really stopping us to have a build target in the system text in the system.rune, let's say, NuGet package, to say if you consume me on .NET 6, I just failed to build because I'm not supporting that target.
But
In
you don't
which
need to do
case,
that though.
I
well,
think our library is producing warning today if you are targeting out of support .NET versions. So this by default, I mean, like, people building, like, targeting .NET 6 and using the packages, they will get some warning telling, like, this is not supported targeting.
Yeah, and
We
I
already.
suppose
Mhm.
if you're targeting Net6, like, why are you using the latest system text basin? I mean, it'd be a weird scenario
Because
a little bit.
if we
I
do
think
the
I
standard
think
thing,
you will get a warning at that time.
yeah, if we do the standard thing, there would be a net 472, a net core 8, and
Right.
a net standard 2. So if you
That's right.
loaded this package into a graph on net 6, you would get the net standard impl, which would not be a type forward, and you would just have a rune exchange, a rune type and a rune type, and they're not type identity. I think they'll both load. The runtime can handle the same type in the same namespace in two different assemblies, but anywhere that the compiler sees this, it would now fail to build if you talked about rune because it wouldn't know which one you wanted.
That makes sense to me.
So
But
the
it
transitive
wouldn't.
dependency would be fine, but if the application that's running on 6 itself tried ever talking about rune, it would get into pain.
Yeah, there is one caution here about first, as I mentioned, about, like, if you are targeting .NET 6, you will get a warning during the build time. This is my understanding, so this will be fine. Second, about, like, we have to be careful about, like, what you are saying, because there is some cases that we run into problems with that. I mean, especially, like, if the code is using, like, the compiler feature like init, which is using internal type. So in .NET Core, we don't define the internal type because it's already defined in corelib. And in net standard, we have to define the type ourselves inside the assembly. So if you are targeting .NET Core and you are going to use net standard 1, most likely you will get some problem with the compiler telling, like, this type is defined twice, and you will run into problems. Just in case, I mean, like
But those are us
this is
problems, not caller problems.
Yeah.
Why was this not a problem with system.index and system.range? Like, those types were introduced in what, .NET 5?
yes,
And we moved them out of band in the .NET 9 release, and the out of band package references net standard, net 8, and net 9. So
right.
presumably, if you have an application targeting net 6 and you ingest the net standard,
Yeah,
Yeah.
in our packages today, I mean, we are adding some script telling, like, if you are targeting out of support version of .NET Core, you will get some warning during the build. This first thing.
But also,
Yeah.
didn't the
Yeah.
APIs for index and range that we shipped in that OOP, doesn't it match how index and range shipped initially? Like, did we ship additional APIs since then? I don't think we did.
yeah, but
No.
that's not the argument I'm making,
Yeah.
though.
It-
The argument I'm making is, like, if you pull in the net standard 2.0 package while your application itself targets net 6, you still have the compiler ambiguity.
Yeah,
And
if
everyone
it
seemed to be okay with that.
if it floats up into your compiler dependency list instead of just a runtime transitive dependency, then if you talked about index, it would say you need to decide if you want index or index, and then that requires using an obscure compiler flag that probably no one outside the company understands.
Yeah, and presumably it was okay for us to ship index and range out of band, even though we were targeting a framework other than when those originally shipped. And if it was okay for that, presumably it's okay for this too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that's what the consequence is. I don't.
Yeah.
The other one of we let the net standard one get API ahead of what it could unify with. So whatever the lowest TFM in the target is, the net standard can't have things from that because the lowest TFM is going to forward, and then you would get a compiles just fine and you get a missing method exception. some variant of
Yes.
missing member exception. But
Right.
so I mean, I think it's all problems we've hit before with partial OOBs, especially with corelib, because you can't do assembly replacement, which is like ASN. You reference a newer package, it just wins. It replaces the one from inbox, but you're not allowed to replace corelib.
Shame.
I mean, to Levi's point, I'm not sure it was considered because I don't think that graph actually composes the way you want. Because basically, if you have a library that targets net6, that references system memory that brings in index and rune, you end up with a separate type. Then you reference it from a net9 app where it's now unified, but like your references are to do two distinct types. So I don't think the graphs actually work correctly. It might just be we didn't care, we didn't test for it because it's out of support, but that's, I think if we want to go down that path, I think I would want to make it more explicit in the packages and just have it fail, because it's like, for graphs that we know won't compose, it seems bad to just let it explode down the road with what I would consider fairly unintelligible error messages with, oh yeah, you know, multiple type definitions found or can't resolve type, blah, 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 right? Or verse runtime errors, right? Now, I don't think it will, I think your point is valid though. Like, do we need to care about this, right? And if the answer is no, then we should just, you know, fail the build and say, sorry, we don't support those frameworks anymore. So tough luck.
Could also just put in the assets, couldn't we? I mean, I know we've explicitly been removing assets. But we could always add the assets for net6, net5, etc.
I mean, we could, but we specifically don't want to build for auto support frameworks anymore, right? So like these two things are, I guess, somewhat at odds, right?
Yeah, it's going to become more and more difficult for us to build for out of support frameworks going forward.
I mean, this is really the problem with net standard, right? Because net standard is, you can think of it as a very old version of .NET Core, but it is our only version of a library standard that allows us to target both .NET Framework and .NET Core, right? And Framework is not going to disappear. So we basically have this old thing that effectively pins, you know, all previous versions of .NET Core in that graph somehow, right?
What if we changed the namespace that the type was in for the static APIs and just said, like, look, it's its own static API, and in .NET 8 and beyond, it simply turns around and calls into the real framework implementation. Then there's no ambiguity.
But
Wait.
how user will write code for this? I mean, like if I'm writing libraries that targeting net standard and .NET Core,
The statics
I'm
aren't a
going to
problem.
Yeah.
It's about
The-
type unification with the instance, or with the instantiable ones.
The type unification shouldn't be a problem because we didn't add APIs to the exchange type. The exchange type has basically been locked as an API surface since its release.
I mean,
it would be an issue if it was in a different namespace.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I just, we don't need to do the static types. I don't think we need to do anything clever with. If you get the net standard version, it says it's implemented here. You get the behavior. It does what it does. It might be missing bug fixes from the runtime, but it'll do what the package said to do.
Yeah.
The instantiable ones is when you need to unify, and that's when you get because you unified, you might get a missing method exception if you let your ref creep ahead.
Yeah.
But
I mean, what
we
you
would
just
just lock the
suggested
API
is,
surface.
yeah, I mean, what you said about the static type, I mean, namespace changes are a very heavy hammer. I think just having both types diverge is fine if we don't want to unify them. I mean, we have certainly done that in other places as well. It's just not a generic solution because it only applies for static things. It doesn't apply to instance methods or... So like for anything that has to unify, you basically have to freeze the API surface.
But that's okay. That's for this scenario, that's totally fine.
If it's only about static stuff, then I think they have solutions. Yeah.
The only exchange type here is the rune type itself, and the out of band package could very easily freeze that at whatever it was introduced at. Like that type has not really changed at all. It's only the static helper methods changed.
Okay. And then so index assuming it lives in Microsoft BCL memory, index and range would have the same. If you target, I'll say net 5, just assume that they exist there. If Microsoft BCL memory ends up in your reference graph, such that the compiler considers it in scope for targeting, then you would get, I have 2 non-unified copies of index. Which one did you want? But the runtime would be fine as long as the compile succeeded. You'll get one or the other. It'll never be confusing.
Yep.
Yeah, keep in mind that unless we actually have a net6 target in this package, which I don't think anyone's advocating that we do, then this is a non-issue anyway.
No, that's when the issue pops up. It's you
Right,
don't
right,
have a net6 target, so if somebody's compiling against net6, they see system.rune from corelib and system.rune or system.text.rune from this package, and there's no type forward, and it says system.text.rune is ambiguous. Which one did you mean?
Right.
Well,
And
it's even
there are
worse.
ways to disambiguate that.
Right.
Yeah.
If we actually care about it, it's like most of this, I mean, Rune was introduced in 3.0.
Mhm.
So if we give up on only considering in support things, and it goes all the way down to 3.0.
Right. I'm just
Which we can't build for.
it's a compile only problem for people using an out of support thing.
Yeah.
There are workarounds. I think it's important we acknowledge that the problem exists, but I personally I don't think it's a blocker. To me, the blocker is the thin end of the wedge, slippery slope. Like how much time do we spend saying this is for the future only, and then going back and adding more maintenance burden on ourselves?
I mean, the answer is unfortunately for everything we want to share with .NET Framework. So it's I wish the set was smaller, but like, I mean, it's not that big of a set, but it's a problem that keeps coming up, right? Like that's definitely true.
Well, for stuff like, for all of these out-of-band backports, including for index and range, I think we've basically put our foot down and said we can, due to the way that we've backported it, we can never version it further, correct?
That's true if it's in framework and core. You're not in both, so you're not as footgunned.
What? Just taking a step back, what problem are we actually solving here? I mean, I see the description at the top of this about how we're building source into a few different libraries. Is that the extent of it?
It's a lot of source being copied. It's thousands of lines of code.
Sure.
But it's also one of those things where, like, if we're doing it, chances are other people are probably wanting to do it as well. And then the problem becomes, like, when we make a change, when we make a fix, for instance, how many different packages does that have to flow into? If we're doing source sharing within our own projects, it's relatively easy for us to say, well, here are all the different places that have consumed it. But again, if we know that we need to do this, we should assume that the rest of the ecosystem, at least some aspect of them, is doing it too. And we don't have any way of communicating to them, like, hey, this code that you've copied in has had a fix that you need to pull in. Like, pulling it in as a package rather than as source will make everyone's lives easier as far as updates go.
Do we have examples of that with Rune, where we've made a bug fix and we had to go and tell people about it?
We've had to tell ourselves about it because
That's
we
different.
have made bug fixes before.
So we think going forward, if I'm understanding this correctly, there will be more desire for bug fixes in Rune than adding any API whatsoever, because we're stopping ourselves from doing that.
It's not. It's more of an overall ecosystem hygiene and health thing, where if we have evidence that we're doing this, we should assume other people are doing it too, and like copying code is not a good thing, like especially when we're talking hundreds, thousands of lines of code. A lot of it being unsafe code.
I'm not arguing that no one else is doing it, but
yeah,
the kinds of functionality that we work on, it's not the normal. Like the fact that we have to copy some functionality into system text encoding's web, there are very few other projects in the world that implement the equivalent of system text encoding as web. There's a reason we provided it at the bottom of the platform. Again, I'm not saying no one else does this, but
So
I don't think it's like everyone and and their brother.
no, it's not everyone and their brother, but like any network processing library, any library that deals with network traffic is going to have to do UTF-8 conversion, for instance. And the UTF-8 conversion APIs are ostensibly going to be in this package, the operation status based ones.
Sure, but that's not. I think we should be careful not to treat this as a grab bag where we can just throw everything in. So what is the extent? Like, what are all the types that are being discussed here? Is it just UTF-8? Is it UTF-8 and Rune? Is it a whole bunch of other stuff? Because I think there's a different bar for things like UTF-8 that are just static methods versus things like Rune that are exchange types.
So my understanding is that STJ uses the UTF-8 static methods more than anything else, but I think Eric, you're on the call. Feel free to chime in if you want. I know I'm kind of taking up all the air in the room right now.
So I know STJ right now is using the static UTF-8 methods for not sure about the Rune methods.
There is I'm looking through the code, there is a single call to Rune, but that's using only one very particular function of it, which could be duplicated if needed. It's a small amount of code. I see lots of references to it, weirdly enough, from ASP.NET. I don't think those are ASP.NET 2.3 things. I think they're all ASP.NET Core 8 and 9 things.
Yeah, Eric saying that STJM is not using Rune.
Yeah, I do.
If all we need
see,
is those two methods, that's different. I mean, not saying I'm happy with yet another backport compat, but I think to Steve's point, adding two static methods is different than adding an instantiable type that has to forward and all the other machinery that goes with it.
And that would be fine, I think. Again, I'm looking through STJ like I see 3 references to Rune from STJ, but again, they're all very small. And if really needed, they could copy the code. It's not a huge issue. The code that they would need to copy is not controversial.
Would we consider adding it to our extensions or our memory package, BCL that memory or whatever it is, instead of creating a new one?
Are we allowed to change that package?
We just
You mean
added
system memory.
It's Microsoft
just
BCL
added-
memory.
Oh,
We just added index and range to it, so
Yeah.
it seems like we can. I mean, I would generally say if we can. I think at that point, given that this package already has to do type forwarding, I don't think it's bad to add Rune to it.
It's also where
to do it.
base 64 exists, so it's
Yeah.
already where we backported some operation status text transforms.
I mean, to the earlier point that Stephen made, I think the question is like, where do we draw the line, right? And I think, to me, the line is drawn either if we do our natural gymnastics or the ecosystem has to do our natural gymnastics. The problem with the statement ecosystem is making our natural gymnastics, it doesn't even matter how many people are impacted by this, right? Let's say it's only 4 packages, right? And let's say one of those packages is like, similar in size of, let's say, system Newtonsoft JSON, right? So widely used, right? Well, if they copy 5 lines of code, probably not a big deal. If they end up with copying, 1,000 lines of code, and it's all unsafe code and it's buffer manipulation, well, if we fail to update that other package, that might still impact a ton of customer apps. So everybody would have been better off with a package dependency that you can at least upgrade, right? And so I think that's why it's a bit hard to quantify the damage here without a lot of research. And so it's like, well, what's the cost of adding another OOP? And we kind of know what that cost is. And so I think once we enter that realm of like, okay, this is unsafe code, it's platform, or it should be platform provided code that deals with Unicode, I'm inclined to just honestly take it. So long we can make it work with the existing constraints, right? I'm not very gung-ho about inventing a new paradigm where, oh yeah, in net 6 things don't compose in the graph, but that's fine because it's out of support, right? As long as we avoid those kind of foot guns, I think I'm cool with just doing what we have done before and just add yet another type to that. That seems fine.
Yeah, I mean, if all we're concerned about is the to and from UTF-16 methods, like, my question really is, why does somebody who's still using net standard 2 care enough to use something other than system the existing Unicode or existing UTF-8 encoding class?
For performance wise.
Yeah, but you're using net standard 2.
Because
you're in the
want to
past.
Use the span APIs,
You're in the past.
which is not exist in the net standard 2.
If we have a compelling reason, we do. But if it's just like, oh, because what if people want to use spans in code that is targeting when dinosaurs roam the earth, then, like, who cares? There's a workaround. If we think it's important, we think it's important. I'm just, like, we need to remember that every ounce of effort we spend supporting people who are stuck in the past is 6 ounces of effort we take away from the future.
So with that in mind, and also, you know, listening to what Steve had mentioned earlier, like the thing that would give us the most bang for the buck while minimizing the amount of work being done is to bring forward just the UTF-8 static class. What we might want to do is just say, bring those 3 methods forward, and talk about the exchange type at some future date if there happens to be a burning desire for it. But bringing those 3 methods forward immediately solves the issue that STJ had.
That seems fine to me. I think that's a good compromise.
Which are the 3 methods that we're looking at? Because I see 2
So,
on the UTF.
Yeah, there's one that's not listed here, which is UTF-8.isValid. I'll put it in chat right now.
So there is the Rune decode from UTF-8 that SCJ is currently using, so it wouldn't address that directly.
Correct, but that was what I mentioned earlier about that's a small enough amount of code where it could, like, they could just duplicate it like they're doing today.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if we just talk about unblocking system text.json and we feel like the amount of code we have to copy is small enough, I think that's a fine compromise. Like, my impression based on this issue was that there's other people asking for it. So we should at least make sure we're not like doing one thing and then we have to do the other thing later anyway. That seems then wasted effort as well. But other than that, I think that seems fine to me.
I know that the Azure SDK team they weren't interested in Rune, but they were interested in the UTF-8 type itself, the static APIs.
Yeah.
And they even commented on the issue saying that they were interested.
Yeah,
just a question about, like, does this 3 APIs that we are talking about include the encoding, decoding UTF-8 with spans?
Yes, it's what's right in the middle of Jeremy's screen right now. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
IsValid was introduced in .NET 8, which is why it's not in the original proposal, because the proposal was written before that. But we've seen that STJ and other consumers have a need for it.
Yeah.
So we should add it.
Does the out-of-box STJ already have a dependency on the relevant library? I don't think it's a deal breaker. I'm just curious if we're going to bring along a whole bunch of stuff that...
It should, because I think that's where span comes from.
Yeah.
No, that's
Span comes from
system
system
memory.
memory.
Oh. Never mind.
Yeah, I don't think
That
it
would be an easy
depends
question.
on... Yeah, maybe it does. I don't know.
Correct, this would be a new dependency.
There's no issues with that. No known issues with that, right? Other than size.
I mean, we have added dependencies before to system text.json, but I would not go so far and say it doesn't have issues. It highly depends on what you're measuring, right? If you take hello world with system text.json and you enable the trimmer, I don't know, does the new dependency regress that meaningfully? Maybe. And if it does, do we care? I mean, that's another question that's probably fair to ask.
Can you
Yeah.
even trim that standard too? So,
Right. That's what I was just going to say. Trimming's only supported
Fair
on
enough.
core app.
Fair enough. So maybe it
So
doesn't matter then.
The
yeah.
dependency won't be there on the core app.
right.
Yeah, and clearly we don't care about .NET Framework, so
On .NET 8, excuse me, on the .NET 8 target framework, would this literally just type forward to the existing API inbox?
It's probably your easiest bet.
Okay.
Is it possible you type forward few methods, not the whole type?
I don't think you can type forward individual methods. But by the way, these three methods are a subset of what's available on .NET 8. I don't think there's a desire to bring over the other .NET 8 methods right now.
Yeah.
The other .NET 8 methods deal with interpolated string handling, which
yeah.
I don't think is relevant to this issue.
Yeah.
I don't think that
Unless-
exists in standards. So
Yeah, unless Steve, you can think of any reason that these should be brought back as well. You're kind of the expert in the interpolated area.
I mean, it would change how the C# compiler compiled interpolated strings in theory, because all it's caring about is whether the surface area is available. We would need to bring over all the relevant support and validate that it worked, and it's only for the 99.9% cases, it's kind of an implicit performance optimization for the compiler. So I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do so.
and if they're targeting net 8 and you do the type forward, then the methods exist. So it would only be interpolated string handling
Oh,
when targeting when targeting something older than net 8 or targeting net standard or targeting net framework, and I don't think we would care about any of those.
Sorry,
What
I
happens
misspoke.
with-
I thought we were talking about I saw the interpolated string handler argument, but I didn't realize we were talking about the UTF-8 try-write methods.
Right, try right and friends, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because these aren't even implicit. You'd have to call them.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, no one's asking for them. They weren't part
Exactly.
of the original
Yeah.
proposal.
Again, they would be there if you're targeting 8 or 9. It would.
Okay.
It's just if you reference this package and then you couldn't call try write with. But I mean, you couldn't call try write. It doesn't exist.
And we've talked in the past about how we can't add more to such a package, but in this case, if the method already existed, we actually could add it in later, right? So it's not like all or nothing right now. We could add the try write subsequently if we cared to.
That's right.
Yes.
especially because the type's static.
Yep.
So if then this is a subset, or if in net standard we're introducing a subset of what's in net 8.0,
Yep.
what happens when we drop support for net 8.0 and then apps that were targeting net 8.0 like upgrade system text JSON and then they're getting the net standard version of this package going
Then
forward?
I think we've been building into our package as a warning that basically says you're doing something that's unsupported, it's not going to work. I think
So
that's
just don't update
presumably
your
what happened
package
here.
at that point, or update everything, but don't update half.
Right.
Yeah, if they're targeting net 8, since Microsoft BCL memory doesn't have a ref directory, I think it means its ref looks exactly the same as the source. So it'll see a. Oh, sorry.
No,
It's
it's
if they're
just like
targeting net 8, they get a
we-
type forward, and then the type forward goes away, and then they get the smaller type.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, they'd get
So
a
do we-
compile error and a
But
package
if we
warning.
don't, well, if the net 8 asset, since these are just statics, if the net 8 asset goes away and they bind to the net standard implementation, it just
It would be missing the members
Oh,
that we
missing
hadn't
the
copied
try
back.
write.
If they're only calling these 3 members, everything works fine. It's if they called try write, which is the only thing added after or 8 or later, then they would get a compile failure due to the method not being found and the package warning of you have a package from the future but you're stuck in the past.
Well, even if they did target one of the methods that's both in the net standard and the type forward, as soon as they drop back to the net standard, right, you would get the two competing definitions, right, if you tried to recompile.
Yeah, you get a warning. I don't think you get an error.
Anyway.
Yeah, Stefan's right though. You would get you would get alerted somehow that there are two types with the same name, and there's an ambiguity.
Which is like the state you're already in for .NET
Yeah.
6. Like the point is, it will just keep happening going forward, but
Yep.
like you're just as unsupported in the future as you are today. So I guess it's not that different.
I mean,
Just
but that's
clarify,
also
though,
not the
even-
only case. That's the general outcome of us still building for net standard while dropping support for out of support net core platforms. So it's not the only case where this occurs.
Just to confirm, though, we are talking about unifying, even though these are static APIs, we are talking about unifying on supported platforms.
Yeah.
Supported net core platforms, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And I suppose the intent is when we service the platform, you get the fixes, right?
Right.
Yes.
Although presumably we're also servicing the package at the same time, and I mean, you still have to go and do the work to update the package on your own, but
Right.
the fix should be available simultaneously.
Right, but like in practice, it means when we service the runtimes, you don't have to do anything to your deployed apps versus, at least on Windows, you don't have to, right?
Yeah, I do want to think about this a bit, like, Jeremy was saying earlier in terms of support costs, because like it's one thing to say that if you are targeting an out of support framework and using the latest packages, that's on you, but people are going to run into this and they're going to file issues, and we're going to like have to explain to them like what's going on, and so I mean it will create friction no matter how unsupported it is.
It is.
But we already have this case today, right? I mean, it's not
Not for
something
system text JSON though, right? Like system text JSON will work, and that's a popular package.
I mean, let's pencil in this decision for UTF8 for now. I feel like we should have a different conversation at some point about how we want to square the circle between net standard and our desire to drop out of support frameworks. Because I feel like the particular path of that we're on, where we basically kind of try to still support .NET Standard while simultaneously killing it, like that creates friction somewhere. I'm not sure that the friction we create in the packages is necessarily the best one, because the alternative is for us to just drop .NET Standard support altogether and tell everybody else to dual target, which is already what part of the ecosystem is doing. Like SQL Client is doing that already. Others have started following suit. However, that has other downsides, because now we push all the problems into the IDE layer where we know multi-target, and we know that multi-targeting in the IDE has other issues in the experience. So it's like, well, we are a little bit of a I guess turning point now where we have to decide which adventure to choose.
You mean we're giving them opportunity and motivation to improve their experience?
I mean, we say that, but there's real cost, right? Because every time you multi-target, you're effectively saying you target, you basically duplicate the number of projects the IDE has to handle every time you add a TFM, right? So like it's a very expensive thing to run, and sometimes there are no good choices. Like it's you just have to decide, what do you want to do? And some of the complexity lands on the customer's plate. That's just, and people in the ecosystem seem to say this kind of what the thing is that Eric was just posting with stop lying about .NET Standard. Some people prefer that world. I'm skeptical that if everybody would follow that is a better world to be, because now your package graphs get really freaking complicated, because, well, not only are the packages you consume multi-targeted, your own solution is ending up being multi-targeted in many cases, and so the number of projects and graphs you have to reason about is going up fast.
Maybe. I mean, I actually suspect that if we stopped making net standard easy to work with and said we didn't care, that people would not multi-target, they would drop framework,
Well,
is my guess.
I mean, I think that's, yeah, I'm not sure that's what happens, because I feel like practically the same reason why we keep shipping stuff for .NET Framework is why some of our customers are doing it, right? Like it's if your target audience is stuck on .NET Framework for whatever reason,
Yeah.
well, you know, you're kind of stuck there too with them, whether you want it or not.
Yeah, but there is a bit of we do it because our dependencies are asking for it, but they're really asking for it because we do it. So I'm not saying it would be a perfect world. I don't think it would be everything explodes. I think some people would just start cutting their losses. But that is outside this issue.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we agree we don't create an OOB package. We add these to BCL memory, and we're adding only the one type as of what it looked like in Net 7. Unless it's Net 8 for the...
Yes.
It's not eight,
Net
but yeah.
8, yeah.
So we're taking part of its Net 8 shape. Okay. Because Net 8's also when we added try-write.
Mhm.
All right. Any final words on this one?
Works for me.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you for a lively discussion.
Now I need to run to other meetings.
All right. API for removing and replacing the standard resilience and hedging handlers. This is .NET Extensions 5, 6, 9, or 5.
Right. Just a brief introduction. Yeah, we, as part of the .NET Extensions, provide APIs for registering standard resilient handlers in HTTP clients request pipeline. And yeah, for that, we currently provide the only method that, actually not the only method, a set of methods that add this standard resilient pipelines into the HTTP client's request pipeline, but we don't provide any means for removing or replacing the standard resilience pipelines. So this creates some difficulties for our users. And yeah, one of such scenarios, it includes leveraging method from .NET, which allows you to configure to set up some default configuration of HTTP client. Yeah, the method is configure HTTP client defaults. And yeah, so using this method to configure standard resilience pipeline as one of the default configuration of HTTP client. Yeah, from one side, this is convenient because yeah, you are able to specify this resilience handler as default configuration in your application, but it brings some difficulties that our users are facing. And yeah, some of these issues, they are described in those scenarios in the description. Like, for example, we use the API we are currently providing, or not the API, functionality we are currently providing. Users cannot remove existing resilience pipeline that was registered as default one and add a custom one. And yeah, in the code sample, comments, yeah, they describe what we want to achieve and how we would be able to achieve that if we had some additional APIs or some functionality available. Yeah. In particular, in this code sample, yeah, we are missing a method that would help, that would allow customers to remove standard resilience handler that was configured as default and then register custom one. Yeah, another scenario which also is not possible at the moment is overriding configuration that was registered as default one. Let's say we configured resilience handler with some configuration settings, and then for one particular endpoint we want to override the settings, let's say by increasing number of retries or changing timeout settings. And at the moment it is not possible because yeah, we are not providing such kind of functionality. And the last sample is replacing default resilience pipeline with a custom one. Yeah, by replacing, keeping the order where the original default pipeline was registered. So we don't want to remove the original default pipeline. We don't want to remove the default pipeline and then append the new one, custom resilience pipeline, at the end of the HTTP request, HTTP client pipeline. But instead, we want to replace the default pipeline with a custom one. So to keep the order where it was registered. Yeah, it is important in some cases because these resilience pipelines, they emit some telemetry and metrics, and it is important to keep its order so that the metering values will not change if we change configuration of HTTP client pipeline. So yeah, we have these three issues, and we are proposing two approaches how to fix them. Yeah, the first, the first proposal we described in this description as the API proposal itself, and the second proposal, it is described as alternative solution, and it is, yeah, it doesn't introduce new API, but instead it suggests to change semantics of the existing APIs that we provide. So the API proposal, yeah, we propose to introduce a method for removing all resilience handlers, and yeah, it's on the first code sample, and also two sets of methods for adding or replacing standard resilience and hedging handlers into HTTP client's request pipeline. So these methods, they are quite standard. I mean, they just have overrides for providing settings using either configuration settings or delegate. Yeah, this is code samples for standard resilience handler, and we also need to introduce such set of methods for the hedging pipeline, which is another standard pipeline that we currently provide. You can see these methods below if you scroll down. So this is the proposal, and if we can continue to the API usage, it will show how these new APIs will help to fix those issues that were mentioned before.
Stefan, is this a normal pattern?
No, not the add or replace thing. Question: are these like alternative API proposals. So are we saying we either add the remove all resilience handlers API, or we do the add or replace stuff? Or are you suggesting we take all of this?
Yeah, I didn't get the question fully.
So so everything in this API proposal, do you need it all
Yes.
together? Or if we just approved like the one remove all resilience handlers method, would that meet your needs?
If we jump into the alternative design, yeah, it suggests to keep only remove all resilience handlers method and change semantics of the existing add methods so that they would do add or replace logic.
And change the semantics. Why do we need to do both? If you can remove everything, what's wrong with just adding?
We need to change semantics to support that last scenario when we want to replace existing resilience handler, because we want to keep the order where it was registered. Yeah, this issue number 3.
So basically you don't want to clear it because you want to keep its position in the delegating handler pipeline.
Yeah. That's the reason why we are suggesting either to introduce that add or replace methods or change semantics of the existing method. Yeah, otherwise we would just suggest that remove all resilience handlers method, and that would be sufficient.
So I was reading ahead a little. I wasn't clear on like if you're proposing everything together, but you mentioned in the risks that like a more detailed name, certainly not a better name, but like for add or replace would be like add standard resilience handler or replace any standard handler with standard resilience handler, which apparently would include hedging handlers. So you would replace a hedging handler with a resilience handler using add or replace resilience handler.
Yes, exactly.
Which is like mind blowing to me. I don't understand the position thing. So normally when you create one of these, okay, so you have the default resilience handler. So in this sample, like in issue 3, there's only one delegating handler, right? To start with before you call add standard resilience handler a second time. So I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
But presumably there could be a longer pipeline of like non-standard handlers, and that's the scenario is like you want to keep the same relative position to the non-standard handlers.
Yeah. So regarding non-standard resilience handlers, yeah, we don't. Yeah. By saying non-standard, we mean handlers that were created by customers, and yeah, we don't really know what they are doing there. But regarding standard resilience handlers, yeah, having more than one in the HTTP client request pipeline, yeah, is considered incorrect behavior, yeah, because it would break the request pipeline.
So if these are all standard handlers, so these aren't handlers that like, you know, people have defined their own delegating handler types. This is something that's in framework, right? Like, why don't you just override the options for like the existing handler? Is that like not a thing you can do? Like use the same handler and just like change the options if the idea is to replace it. Isn't that effectually the same thing?
Yeah, if we implement that alternative design, that would be the idea that you're currently talking about.
I see. I see. So we changed the behavior of add standard resilience handler. Like today, it would just add a new standard handler at the end of the pipeline.
Mhm.
But so what if instead of calling like add or replace or whatever, why not just be like configure resilience handler and then you override the options? Like you're not adding or replacing any handler. It's the same handler. You're just changing the options. Like would that still satisfy the scenario?
Yeah, that would work, but that that wouldn't reflect the operation that was performed by this configure method, because yeah, when we configure, currently I'm going into implementation details, but when we are configuring resilience handler, meaning that we keep default behavior for some of HTTP clients and then configure for one particular HTTP client this new setting, in essence, we would replace that default resilience handler with a new one with those configuration settings. And yeah, that's because of the way we apply these resilience handlers to HTTP clients. Yeah, they are applied per each named HTTP client. So if we want to configure some resilience handler settings for particular HTTP client, then we actually would create a new resilience handler and apply it for that HTTP client.
Is okay. It's not like what I would have expected, but is there like any observable impact to that? Because again, it's not a user type that we're recreating. So like, does the user care if we like under the covers created a new handler versus reconfigured the existing one? I'm just thinking of it like semantically, like trying to think of a good name, because like add or replace, where replace isn't even necessarily the same kind of handler, but you put the kind of the handler in the name of add or replace. Like, yeah, I'm trying to get rid of that. And whoever, is it you, Jeremy? Like if you scroll down to risks, I'm talking kind of about the top risk. Like, you know, this isn't. So I'm just like, yeah, thinking if there's any alternative, which one of them, right? Like I guess is to change the semantics of add standard resilience handler and add standard hedging handler such that it replaces if it's already there.
Yeah, they would. Yeah, if we are talking about alternative design, that would replace existing standard resilience handlers. And yeah, currently I'm thinking about configure approach, and one issue that I currently see is that standard resilience and hedge handlers, they have different actually. Yeah, they have different options.
I was suggesting 2 configure methods, one for each type. Maybe 3, right? If you still need the I configuration overload for the resilience handler. I will say, like, between add or replace and like changing semantics of add, I do prefer changing the semantics of add. I think, you know, it's kind of smart to suggest, like, you know, assuming you wanted to change the semantics of add, suggesting the add or replace things like a good way to get us there, because I think that's clearly worse. But I do think like the more conventional thing in like the Microsoft extensions namespace is not to have, I mean, having add replace is fine for services that are only resolved once, right? Like where there can only conceivably be one version of it. Like that is how it works with DI. Like the last add kind of wins. But with delegating handlers, since that can be a pipeline, the fact that add isn't adding to the pipeline does seem weird to me. So configure might be better.
Yeah, I and my colleagues, we would prefer to implement that alternative design, meaning change the semantics of the add method. And yeah, we didn't consider this configure approach. Yeah, probably we would need to investigate it also.
Yeah, and I guess like, you know, if you could argue like, you know, in this domain, like why would you have layers of resilience handlers, right? Like it would be kind of weird probably to have more than one in the pipeline. Like maybe you can make it a case that yeah, just adding multiple to the pipeline is nonsensical to begin with. We're not going to break anyone by having this replace.
Yeah. All right, but yeah, but we still cannot fully. Using this configure approach, we still cannot fully solve that third issue with replacing existing resilience pipeline with a custom one. Let's say we registered resilience handler as a default pipeline, and then we want to replace it with the hedging handler.
Yeah, so that's an interesting scenario, but from what it sounds like, what you want to happen is you add a default resilience handler via configure HTTP client default, and then if I call add standard hedging handler, like you want it to replace the resilience handler, which is interesting to me because like I wouldn't expect it to do that. Like maybe I'm not as much of a domain expert, but like I would not expect calling add standard hedging handler to overwrite the call to add standard resilience handler globally, right? Like, doesn't that just seem weird? Like if you don't like know that it does that.
Yeah, I fully agree that that's the issue of these two approaches: add or replace, or changing semantics of add methods.
Yeah, so like part of me is like, so if you call remove all resilience handlers, is that removing hedging handlers as well?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Can we just make that two methods? Maybe that will clear things up. We'd have remove all resilience handlers, or and maybe it should and remove all hedging handlers. Or and do we have to put standard in the name? Because can you have like a custom resilience handler?
By introducing that by remove all resilience handlers, we were thinking about removing all standard handlers, hedging and resilience.
Oh, so instead of okay, so remove all standard handlers instead of remove all standard or remove all resilience handlers. I mean, that would better describe what it's doing, right?
Modulo somebody knowing what a standard handler is.
Right. I mean, that is true. I will say, like, these handlers were added by, you know, add standard hedging handler or add standard resilience handler. So, you know, you are repeating the word from other APIs.
Indeed, but somebody who just sees a remove call, like somewhere there was a I mean, I guess this is going to do standard twice, but if you just saw like, oh, go get the custom HTTP client thing, remove all standard handlers, that to me sounds like clear the pipeline. Like, oh, obviously it came with a pipeline, so get rid of the standard things because I want to configure it now.
Yeah, I agree with you, but it's still better than remove all resilience handlers, removing standard hedging handlers.
Unless hedging extends resilience.
Maybe. Does it?
Oh, it's two separate. They are two separate resilience handlers.
So resilience is resilience and hedging is resilience, but
Uh,
only in your head. Okay.
I see. So they're both kinds of resilience handlers, which kind of make it weird,
Yes.
which makes sense.
But not according to the type system.
Yeah. So maybe if you called it like, yeah,
So, I mean, what we have from chat on this so far is one, that changing the semantics of add feels risky and unnatural, and that add feels like it should add. Though I guess you get to take that with the grain of salt of how the rest of DI works with add being overwrite.
well, only if there's a single thing that you're trying to resolve. Otherwise, it adds, unless you call it like triad.
And then
Yeah.
for the notion of add and replace, there's the question suggestion that should that be a general purpose thing and not tied to this feature, such as add or replace handler on delegating handler. I don't know how you'd get the one to know how to replace, because I don't think you get to see the instance, but that's a... Is this general enough that it should be a problem solved at the higher level instead of at this level?
Is there a workaround today? Like, can I like peer into the delegating handlers on the options or whatever and clear them out manually, or is it an internal thing?
Yeah, it's possible to clear them manually, and that's exactly what our users are currently doing. If they want, to implement one of these, to fix one of these issues, they need to remove resilience handlers manually and then register their own where they need and configure as they need.
Got it. Right, like they can just like do like dot additional handlers, and that's like a list, and you can just party on that. I mean, that's almost clearer. Like, I know these are trying to be helpful, but at least you can get very specific, like if type of whatever, assuming these are public types, which maybe they're not.
If I got the feedback correctly, we should consider this configure approach and introduce like separate set of methods for standard resilience handler and standard hedging handlers. Not to be confusing, right?
I'll admit, like, I was a little bit confused by the fact that a hedging handler was a resilience handler, and now that I'm like reconciling that, this makes a bit more sense. But yeah, I know I've been doing a lot of talking. What do other people think?
Well, you're the expert, so it makes sense if you talk the most.
Yeah, I would say a hard no to like add or replace in general. Like, and it seems like you're even on that side. And redefining add does feel risky, but better, to be honest.
I mean, that's consistent with the rest of ASP.NET, right? We generally don't have add or replace for these kind of services stuff, right?
Right. Like, yeah, pretty much. Like,
But
most of
add
the
for the
cases
most
where you
part, I thought add for the most part is a no op if it's already there. Is that not true?
So for most services, you're resolving a single instance. So yeah, if you're like adding a duplicate entry, it's usually a no-op.
Sorry, no op or
But it,
overwrite?
well, overwrite. But if it's duplicate, it's a no-op. But anyway,
But like
and
adds,
only in
okay.
effect, like if you resolve like an IEnumerable of that service, it would make a difference. It's just that you don't. Like that's how DI works. In this case, it's not even directly in DI. This is managing a list on the options, which isn't too uncommon. But yeah, we don't have much precedence for like replace methods. Certainly add or replace methods.
Yeah.
like add singleton, does that generally no op, replace, or throw, or
So
complicatedly do something that depends on how you ask the question later?
Right. So it depends on how you ask the question.
Okay.
So what it does in effect is it adds a service descriptor to the list. Now, how DI then interprets that when you're resolving the service depends on whether you're trying to resolve a single one or multiple of that service type.
Fair enough.
But I guess for cases where the expectation is you have one, and so everybody's just asking for one, it's a replace.
Right. So in a world where you only are expecting to have one resilience handler ever in your pipeline, you could argue that conceptually add being replaced is pretty normal. But you have to get people of the mindset that there's could only be one of these. And like, I mean, they are delegating handlers. So like, obviously you can have a pipeline of them, and people do that all the time with custom handlers. So it's, you know, a tenuous proposition that it's like obvious that there should only be one of these.
Well, I would say for better or worse, you're already in the world where add means replace or add depending on use case. So you get to decide which side you're on, I guess.
Right. It's just changing it feels a little bad, but yeah, you're right. Like it does make it so that there's some precedence for add basically replacing.
So
the method name is then just add, or what would the method? Or it's
add already exists.
Yeah.
So I think the alternative proposal is keep the remove all resilience handlers. So this would remove the standard hedging handlers, the standard resilience handlers. Would it remove like custom handlers that derive from like resilience handler or whatever? Am I even talking about that?
Yeah, that method it removes all resilience handlers, even custom one.
Okay. Well, then that name, I guess, makes sense. And I do like it better now that I know a hedging handler is a resilience handler. Yeah, like I think I'm fine with this part of the API. And then, yeah, having add change behavior is probably fine. Make a break and change announcement. At least we're doing it early. And then in this world, like if I call add standard hedging handler and I registered a custom resilience handler already, would it replace the custom resilience handler or only the standard ones?
only the standard ones.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a very nuanced behavior you're going for here. So you obviously can't put it all in an API name, as you mentioned in the risks. So if that's what we think makes sense. Otherwise, I maybe like keep the remove all resilience handlers because that seems convenient and not that confusing. And consider keeping, add standard resilience handler and add hedging, standard hedging handler the same. Because like there is the workaround, like you can mutate the list, but technically, yeah, it's kind of API review. It's like, yeah, do you want to change the existing? Do you want to make the breaking change or not? Like you don't have to with the workaround.
Yep. And chat has asked it explicitly, so I'll relay the question. Given that there is a workaround, even if it's a little ugly, is this need actually common enough that it's worth any of this, or should it just be document? Here's how you do it. Because no change is always the best change, unless it isn't.
Yeah, it does seem like a niche enough scenario to me where it doesn't seem too onerous to like mutate the list of delegating handlers. And these are public types too, like the standard handlers I looked, so it makes it even easier to do like typo checks or get type equals typo or whatever.
You have sample code for what that looks like?
I don't, but like it can't be that hard. So yeah.
And an additional suggestion from Chad is the remove is good, but don't change the semantics of add, and don't add or replace. If somebody wants the replace, they can do the index walking themselves.
That's kind of where I'm at, I think. Like, I don't mind having the remove all resilience handlers. It seems pretty clear cut, especially since it's not distinguishing between standard and non-standard ones. The fact that add would distinguish between standard and non-standard ones, and even different kinds of standard ones, is like enough to make me very skeptical of that.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm asking the question. I don't know that it's not common. I don't know how onerous the thing is. I just know someone asked the question, so I'm relaying it.
Yeah.
And that concern regarding changing semantics of add method, and that changed semantic would remove both standard resilience and hedging handler. Yeah, was one of the main reasons for bringing this up here in API review.
Sorry, what was the main reason for bringing this up?
One of the main reasons was that by changing semantics, we are introducing this behavior when let's say at standard resilience handler method, it replaces not only standard resilience handler but also standard hedging handler. So it's like, in my opinion, non-obvious behavior.
But that's not the way it currently works, right? That was the alternative design in this proposal.
Yeah, it's an alternative design, and it's not how it works at the moment.
Yeah. Are you saying that, like, if we don't change the behavior of the add methods, would you still want the remove all method?
Yeah, that would be convenient for users. At least they would be able to remove all resilience handlers and register their own one without introducing their own ways to do that.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, this space better. Like, I'm asserting that this use case is niche enough that manually mutating like the additional handlers on the options isn't so bad. But you've actually seen that code. I'm just imagining it. Is is that reasonable? Like, do you think the workaround is okay for as rare as people hopefully have to do it?
Yeah, the workaround, it works well in case when you want to to remove default resilience handler and add your custom one. But yeah, it doesn't work well when you need to replace resilience handler, meaning you want to keep the position where it was registered initially.
I see, because at that point it's like harder to like, I mean, you could insert into the list, but you're not able to use like the helpful extension methods to add like the standard resilience handler or whatever.
Yes, exactly. You will need to like duplicate all the code that we developed for creating the standard resilience handler into your project and then use it for registering this standard resilience handler in the particular place you want to add it to.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I think you could do, which could be a lot, because like duplicating the code inside the add methods, but then inserting where you need. Could you just call the add method and then reorder the list afterwards? Like, basically first find where the original one was, keep the index, delete it, and then call add, and then move the thing from the end to whatever the index was. I know that's not like amazing.
So what if we additionally look into that suggestion with configure methods?
Yeah, I think the configure thing might work because it's just like a named option with like the standard identifier, right? So in theory, you could just, yeah, like provide a named options configuration callback, and it should just get loaded.
All right, then yeah, I think we will take a look into that approach.
All right, so it sounds like we're adding remove all resilience handlers if everybody's good with the name. And anything else will be in a follow-up, but that we don't want add a replace at this time, and we don't want to change the semantics of add.
Sounds good to me.
I just need to know which set of notes to keep and which set of notes to delete. So. Not the right button.
Yeah, no, this sounds good to me. And got another meeting, but.
All right. Thank you very much. Looks like next up is add a capacity property to PriorityQueue. This is .NET Runtime 110728.
Yeah, I can speak to that one. Basically, it's fairly straightforward exposing of the capacity of the current priority queue, which is in line with most of the other collection types under the system collections.generic namespace.
This is a tree structure, right? So does capacity even make sense?
No, it's array backed. It's using an array heap under reps.
So this is just to be able to ask it how many more can I add before you grow yourself?
Correct.
Same as dictionary.
Does it have a set capacity?
It has an ensure capacity method and a trim excess method.
Seems fine.
Fair enough. So, you know you're about to insert 1,000 things, so you call ensure capacity of count plus 1,000, and then now you can query it if you feel like it.
Yep.
Fair enough.
Yeah, is there any downside conceivable for this? Not really, right?
I mean, given that we've already exposed ensure capacity, I think we're kind of stuck with the current underlying implementation, but I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Any other words?
Go.
Thanks for an easy one, Eric. That sounded like sarcasm, but I meant it sincerely. Conditional weak table get or add. Runtime 89002.
I can speak to this one. So the issue is pretty simple. There's no good way today to do a get or add operation on a conditional weak table. This kind of keeps popping up here and there with people wanting to do lock-free caching things. Most recently, we also hit this in some updates to COM wrappers on native EOT, where we needed to either get the RCW for a given COM object or create a new one and store it, and there's no built-in way to easily do this get or update thing. There's a workaround you can do, which is to use that get value with a discard on the parameter and just return the value that you created, but it's a bit of a foot gun, because if you do that, Roslyn will actually always create a display class to store the value, even if you don't actually take that path. So you end up accidentally allocating, which is not what you reasonably want to do. And also it's just clunky. So the proposal is to add two variants of to do this operation. One is just get or add if you already have the value from somewhere else, and the other is basically another overload of the existing get value, which also takes a state. So you can just create your value in the delegate, basically, and so you can just pick whichever works best for you.
For something like get or add, in theory, you could always just have a loop that did try add, try get value, or try get value, try add, right? It's not like it's impossible to do without this. This just allows you to do it with a lock when it needs to mutate.
Yeah, I think you could either do that or just do the current workaround. I think either would work, but yeah, it's just not intuitive. And also this would presumably let us do it like a little bit more efficiently if it were just built in.
Yeah.
like for sure, for instance, we would go and update com wrappers to use this.
How does com wrappers use a conditional weak table?
We use it to, we have a bunch of them. One of them is to cache RCWs for com objects. And so like we get a com object and we're like, do we have a RCW for this? If so, get that one, otherwise create it. And then we need to check that another thread didn't concurrently create another one. And so we want to get the last one. So right now we have like we try to get it. And if not, we do this like fallback path where we create it and then we do that get value with a discard, passing the value and doing the capture. But instead we could just do this get or add instead.
But the get or add would require you to already have the value created.
I think in that case, what we're doing is we always try to create it, but we want to ensure that the first one wins, basically. So we just throw away if another threat raced against us and won, if I'm remembering correctly.
And that's, I mean, if you're talking about efficiency concerns, that probably is not ideal.
I'll admit I'm not super familiar with com wrappers. That's more of a Jeremy question, but yeah.
I want to ask. I was going to ask, why does the state need to be generic? But then I noticed that you've also added an allows refstruct constraint on the generic parameter. So, do you actually have a use case where you want to be able to pass spans as a state in that create value callback, or is that just future proofing?
That's more future proofing, yeah.
But there's no need to actually have a new delegate type here, right? Couldn't this just be a func?
Yes, it could. I think the reason why I put that was mostly for consistency, because the the existing get value has its own delegate type, so it felt slightly weird to have one taking.
I think that's just from this. If memory serves, this was introduced before.
Yeah, it was 2.0.
Yeah.
I'd be inclined to say that just using the build, there's no need to add more delegates here. We just use the existing delegates and treat the existing one as legacy. So the get value, the proposed get value one is purely there to pass additional state in without a closure?
Yes.
One issue that I'm finding with the shape as it stands, and I communicated this to Sergio over the comments, is that I have a problem with naming this get or add method because, unfortunately, what we usually call get or add on collections is effectively what the existing get value method is doing right now. So I'm slightly concerned that this could be introducing a bit of confusion.
I mean, I agree with you, but that confusion's already there because conditional weak table already broke with that with the existing get value method. Like concurrent dictionary has get or add overloads that are basically both the get or add and the get value that's on the screen here.
Right, but couldn't this just be get value t key comma t value default value, which is the same as calling the callbacky one but without the callback?
I mean, we could basically say conditional weak table calls get or add get value.
Yeah, because it's weird that if you have the value it's called get or add, and if you pass the callback to build the value then it's called get.
Yeah.
So I think it's this type already screwed up the name of get or add, and we should just embrace that.
Hmm.
I mean, seems fine. It's only said if you want to store funcs.
That is interesting.
Well, no, because the func one also takes a third parameter.
Not this one.
That one takes the create value callback, and that already.
If
you're
you
saying if t value is create value callback, that's the concern.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it'd be a create value callback of something else, and it can't be a create value callback of create value callback. The fact that this isn't. Oh no, because the t key and t value are pulled from the parent. So this is actually generic. It just doesn't look it. So it couldn't. The current one can't be circular. I mean, it
And
can't.
the new one takes a third argument.
Yeah, and the new one takes an extra argument. Yeah, it definitely couldn't be circular because it would need to be a create value callback of the. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
I don't think it matters in context. I was about to ask how we handled this in other types, but if we have a collection where I guess it's because if you have a dictionary of something that goes to a func, again the one that wants a func now wants the func of a func instead of. So the fact that the value type is always included in here means you're never ambiguous between the instance and the thing. Your lambda, you may be confused as to which thing the lambda is turning into, but semantically it's always one or the other.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Do we
Yeah, it works
care?
for me.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying works for me. I think that suggestion to collapse get or add into get value seems fine then.
So just to clarify, we're not worried about the fact that you could have like a get value. You could just see somewhere like a get value with the second param being some lambda, and it would not be immediately obvious which overload that's calling. Just to confirm, like we're not worried about that.
How would it not be obvious?
Didn't we say like you could have like what if your conditional weak table the value were some like an actual func?
But and then you're concerned about overlap with the new one that takes a func and a t state.
No, I'm concerned because that would take the third parameter too. I'm concerned about what if maybe I'm just like it's not a thing, but like is it possible that like you could have a get value call where the lambda is a create value callback, and then
The
another
value callback is generic on t value. It refers to the t value. So what would the actual definition of that conditional weak table look like?
some conditional weak table where the t value is like func of object.
It can't be func because it. Well, wait, you actually mean like system.func?
Yes.
And then
Like
you're
you- like
concerned
your
about
values that you want to
you're concerned
capture.
about ambiguity between the func from t key to func.
I'm concerned about, to be clear, when you like compiling, it will always just pick one. I'm just saying like glancing at the code, it would
Right,
maybe
I'm
not.
trying to figure out what you would be like. What would the conditional weak table? Yeah, so conditional weak table.
Like imagine
that-
that t value were func of object, right?
If t value were func of object, okay.
Right. Then you could do get value, you pass whatever key, and then you do a lambda. That lambda, in practice, will always bind to either the first get value or the second one. But just glancing at the code, like it might not be immediately obvious which one it is. Like you would have to actually check which overload it's picking.
I guess that's so. If this is Sure. Func of object.
I'm not saying it's a real problem. I'm just saying, just to clarify, like this is not something that we think is warrants, like concern.
For today, for that to bind to the create value, you'd be binding to something that returned a func object.
Yeah, so this would require that foo itself, like
Returns
foo is
func
either going to
object.
return a func of object, in which case it's a create value callback, or foo returns an object, in which case it's the value, like this lambda is what you want to save. The fact that it's ambiguous and you have to think about it tells you that maybe you shouldn't have written a lambda when you have a conditional weak table that stores funcs.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, like,
Yeah, I think the argument wasn't that the compiler wouldn't be able to resolve it in that ambiguity. It's more like that the human might not be able to, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I'm having trouble just resolving what I'm looking at.
Well, yes. I think in practice, the way it's written here, it would very likely mean you're trying to call the existing one, because it would be very weird that you would do a lambda invocation to return something that again is a delegate. That seems
ha! It called the one you didn't
Yeah.
think.
I mean, you can write it. It's just saying it seems odd to invoke it like that.
Right.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, right now, like you know that the second parameter of get value is always a factory for your value, whereas now it could also be the actual value.
Yeah, but that's only an issue if you're saving a delegate type of any kind of delegate. I assume, with no evidence, just a gut feeling, that the key in conditional weak table is not generally a delegate.
I mean, don't we already have this today with concurrent dictionary, which has two overloads of get or add, one that takes a t value and one that takes a func from t key to t value? Have we ever heard of anyone running into issues?
I don't know
I mean,
anybody having issues.
I mean, we all have issues. I'm not sure we have that particular issue, but it's no. I mean, yeah, it was more like a thought experiment, I guess. So, like, I think it's fine. I think there's not.
I mean, I think what we're talking about here is that a concurrent dictionary effectively has the overloads we're talking about adding. Right? It has a func of t key, t arg, t value. It has a func of t key, t value, and it has a t value.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the only case that this would be interesting is if the average conditional weak table was in fact storing delegates as the values.
Right.
In which case it'd be, domain specialization here says this is actually complicated, but my gut says it's not, and nobody's correcting me on that. So I think we want just that. Yeah. Default value. I think we should call that.
Yep.
Granted, concurrent dictionary just called it value. So.
But is that get value going to actually add it? That's part of the problem with this being called get value, is it's mutating.
As is this one, I assume.
Yes.
And this one.
Yeah.
So it's.
But it's. I mean, yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure why I'm drawing the line at default value.
Value to add if none present. Happy?
Or
No.
created value. I don't know.
I think value is fine in my opinion, because it is logically the exact same thing as if you would have passed the delegate value. I mean, if you really want to, you can call it create value, I guess, because then it's like it's the non-callback version of it. But yeah,
it's fine.
Value seems fine, yeah.
Maybe like alternative option would be to just like hide the existing get value, so it's like poorly named and there's like performance problems every time somebody tries to use it, and add proper get or add value that matches like what we have everywhere else.
Could do that. Slap editor browsable never on the existing ones and add a new set of getter adds.
I mean, that's not a bad idea because it also removes the ambiguity, not ambiguity, but the disjointness between create value callback and the func version. Then they could all take funcs.
Oh, this one already existed, so I should move it up here. But
Conditional weak table is drip by drip becoming a full-fledged iDictionary.
Is concurrent dictionary an iDictionary as well?
Yeah, I mean, they're not like these aren't actually part of iDictionary, obviously, but like it's slowly but surely taking on the full surface area of our dictionary types, which is just interesting because there are comments strewn throughout various places about how it's not a dictionary.
But it is. Always was, right? It's a very special dictionary. Yeah, I think I have a hate-love relationship with it. It's such a powerful thing. Yeah, while you're at it, you would also...
Would we also want to hide get or create value?
Get or create value.
That's add the key and make value be default?
Yeah, activate or create instance.
That's also the only reason why the value has dynamically accessed members, right?
Probably. I haven't. Is it for constructors?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
I mean, I don't think we'd be deleting it. I think it would just be hiding it, so we wouldn't be able to remove that annotation.
No,
would the annotation not be able to move on to the method saying this method causes a dynamic for constructors on the t value, or do you have to put it way up where the type was made generic?
Maybe Janos, I don't think with our trimmer, I don't think we support putting annotations on generic type parameters any place other than where the generic type parameter is defined.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Okay, well, there's a potential future feature for you.
Oh my god, I don't think my website supports that because I don't see it there.
You don't support or you don't show the dynamic
I don't support
access attributes? I
don't support attributes on generic parameters, apparently.
That's
well,
fair.
whatever.
There are only like 4 of them.
Yeah, it wasn't a problem that existed for a long time. But we should probably also hide the type, though, right?
The delegate type?
Yeah. While we edit. Create value callback. Yeah.
Bangs. Does EB never work on a delegate type?
Yeah, I mean, it's like any other member.
Nice.
It's just a nested type.
Right,
no, your syntax for the possible never doesn't work, but that has never stopped you, right?
It's because I don't remember what it's actually called.
Edit a browsable state. But yeah, doesn't really matter.
So this is the alternative we've been discussing. Which I guess means I want to delete these spaces. I think that's the right diff syntax. So these are the two options on the table.
I like the second one.
Same here.
Looks great. Ship it.
And do we want to also obsolete them or just discourage new people from calling the old things?
Yeah, there's no particular harm of people when people call the all things. You know, it's just confusing.
Yeah, given that there aren't any functional reasons for obsoleting them, I don't think, for hiding them, I don't think we should be obsoleting them.
Okay.
Or
This feels like the first time we've ever actually done this to just rename something. I could be
Let's
wrong.
do it.
for the getter add method that takes state, if we wanted to follow what concurrent dictionary does and immutable dictionary does, and maybe there are some others, they call the what's currently t state here, they call it t arg, and then the state parameter is factory argument.
Sure, I was basically aligning with that one. Just apparently went with the name that we call it everywhere else. There, I didn't call it a dictionary. Other types with the same semantics. Alright, so Immo, since what we're saying is we should add these attributes, diff syntax seems correct. Is that going to break your tool? Should I switch it back to C# partial decal or what?
No, I can probably just support that at some point. I just haven't done that. But
Okay. So yes, I copied the name value factory from concurrent dictionary getter add.
Good.
And we wanted to future proof it by allowing ref struct on t state, which is now t arg. So, all right. Any other feedback?
nope.
See if I missed any from chat. Also asking, should we obsolete the things? I guess I can write down that we decided. We're not obsoleting the old members at this time, just hiding them. Okay.
Is GC handle controversial? Or switch a GC handle of T?
Are you asking, should we go into overtime or not?
I don't think it should be particularly controversial, but like famous last words. We did discuss it a bunch.
You know, it is like, it's not single method, so it will take probably at least 20 minutes.
I can stick around if other people are going to.
Same.
Same.
Tobe?
Sure.
All right. GC handle of T, which is like GC handle, but great. 94134.
I can speak to this unless Jan, you want to take it?
No, go ahead, take it.
All right, so the idea here was to fix a bunch of issues with GC handle that we couldn't really address without breaking everything. The first one was we wanted to have it implement iDisposable. We tried it, but we couldn't actually get it through because it turns out that there's a whole bunch of like test code, for instance, in the runtime that's boxing GC handles in various places, and then some other code somewhere else that's then doing type checks and for iDisposable trying to dispose them, and that was breaking everything. So coupling that with other things such as there's some inefficiencies in the normal GC handle type, such as some checks for the pin flag. So we eventually settled on just having a new type, and we also made it more ergonomic, so it's generic, so you don't have to do either casts or just unsafe as if you're feeling brave. So we have two different variants. One is GC handle of T, pretty much the same as GC handle except it's generic, and implements iDisposable. And then another one is pin GC handle for clarity. This one specifically allows you to pin objects. One small semantic difference between this and also GC handle if you specify the pin flag and the old GC handle is that we're no longer going to do some legacy checks that the original GC handle type was doing to determine whether you were actually allowed to pin the object. So these new types will just let you pin whichever object you want to. One of the reasons for having the separate pin GC handle other than clarity is also that we can include a couple of extensions, namely for arrays and strings to easily get the address of the data, respectively either of the array or the string data. That's pretty much it.
So wait, can you elaborate on that? So I can use GC handle of T with GC handle type dot pinned, but we wouldn't encourage that. We'd encourage people to instead use pin GC handle of T.
Yes, so that it's clear like statically that the target is pinned, and also so you get the extensions, which are nice. You don't have to, but you can do that.
Is there a reason to support, like, if we're going the direction of creating new structs for the different GC handle types, do we want the GC handle type on GC handle at all and instead have dedicated handle types for the different types, the different kinds? It just seems like we're creating something that we're going to tell people not to use. If we ever saw GC handle type dot pinned, we'd say, no, don't do that. Use pin GC handle.
If we were to do different types, would that mean that we would need 4 different types, like GC handle, weak GC handle, track resurrection, and pin GC handle?
Well, like, I mean, if we made them, instead of putting constructors here, if we made them be create methods on the existing GC handle, for example, then it would be like GC handle.create pinned returns pin GC handle, GC handle.create gives you a normal one, and create weak also just gives back GC handle of T because you don't have a dedicated struct for it. You're just naming the mode in the method instead of the argument.
Yeah, but if we were to do that, we wouldn't be able to do the GC handle extensions that returns you the kind of unsafe pin pointer.
Yeah, you would. I'm just
like, yes, you would,
I'm just getting rid of
methods...
these 2 constructors and replacing them with 4 create methods.
Yeah, but then the current shape is kind of ensuring through the type system that the extensions methods are only used on pin GC handle.
Yeah, I was gonna leave the pin GC handle existing. So GC handle.create pinned returns a pinned GC handle type.
Basically what he's saying is don't have the constructor that takes GC handle type as an argument and instead have named factory methods so that they can return different types. So this way you don't have the problem because you can't construct the GC handle of T for a pinned GC handle type because you had a factory method and it gave you back a pinned GC handle instead.
This guy.
Would you also want to remove the constructor for the pin GC handle, or would you leave that and just to understand?
I mean, I personally would be in favor of removing that and just only have the factors, because then you have a single entry point.
Yeah. To be. You have create and create weak and create weak. More words here.
What is that one?
Track resurrection. I just remembered it was weak with more words. So
yeah, weak track.
Part of my question as well is, would we even like we use pinned? We use regular GC handles, pinned GC handles, and weak GC handles. Does anyone use weak resurrection tracking? I mean, I don't know. I can't think of any places that we do. Maybe we do.
I think it's used in a couple places in com wrappers and maybe CS1RT too.
You basically use it when you care about finalizers and ordering with finalizers, so it's kind of not necessarily the common case, but it's certainly used in specialized scenarios.
I see, I think 2 hits, assembly load context, and some sort of cache on something. Runtime type, I think.
I mean, it just felt weird to me that we have the just 2 ways of doing something. One way that we would discourage people from doing. So I prefer the factory just purely to avoid to have a pin of success, basically.
Yeah. Do we anticipate extension methods for the weak ones ever?
I mean, possibly. I don't think we have thought of any just yet.
I mean with what was the is it GC handle where we have or there's some type where the thing might go away and so we have a try get instead. What is that?
You probably mean
weak rep or
yeah, that's weak reference, I think.
Yeah. Weak reference and weak reference of T, and like weak reference had an is alive and a target, and weak reference of T had a try get target or something like that. Are we happy with weak and weak track resurrection just exposing target as a property? I didn't participate in whatever the discussion was around the move from weak reference to weak reference of T, so I don't know how important it was that we made that change.
Are you suggesting that you think that the 2 weak variants want a weak GC handle that has a different way of exposing the target?
And then maybe create weak maybe there would just be a single create weak that had a bool track resurrection or something like that.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that would be the more common pattern, because then effectively you could treat GC handle of T as the quote-unquote base type, right? And then if you really want to model the thing, you could have an implicit conversion. So if somebody creates a list of GC handle of T, you can put in any of those, right?
Is that a scenario we care about, Jan? Like, do we expect people to want to treat different kinds of handles all as a quote-quote base type?
I don't think that's... I cannot think of a situation where you want to do that. And, it's not kind of obvious from this shape, but the GC handle is fundamentally unsafe type, right? So if you can always convert the GC handle to int PTR, and then you can kind of store it together with all other things that are in PTRs, right? So if somebody really wanted to have like collection of all sorts of GC handlers, they can just store them as int PTRs and always kind of convert them back to whatever the right
If
type is.
if I have a pin GC handle and I to int PTR it, and then I GC handle that from int PTR, I assume that just works. I just get back a GC handle to the pinned for the pinned thing.
Yeah, like I think the idea was that the generic versions would be interchangeable, but you know, it's like the int PTR isn't interchangeable with the non-generic GC handler. Because the non-generic GC handler has like this like special bit that in the int PTR that says whether the handle is pinned or not.
Interesting.
And that's,
Do we
that's
think
part.
is that lack of kind of consistency between them going to be problematic if we exposed factories on the non-generic GC handle? Like, is that going to suggest that they are interchangeable, or?
Yeah, like I think the original idea was that, you know, this is kind of creating a separate world on GC handlers. So I agree with you that kind of introducing the factories on the non-generic GC handle is kind of
fishy.
You know, it's kind of.
It was just the pattern of get rid of the T, which happens to be the
Yeah.
existing type.
I mean, we could go back if you just have constructors and you add one more type, you add a weak GC handle that has a constructor that takes a bool track resurrection, then you can delete the factories as well, and you just have the GC handle constructor, the pin GC handle constructor, and the weak GC handle constructor.
Yeah, I like that better.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right, so we want a weak one. So I'm going to go ahead and ask, is there a reason we need the target to be settable? Like, I didn't even know it was settable on GC handle, but apparently it is. Because it feels like we're in a much happier state if target is just get. I mean, it could be private set to null it out when you've moved, but
it's, you know, it's common for GC handle to be reused, so it's kind of low level, you know, perf-oriented unsafe type. So if we were to remove the setability of the target, we are kind of, you know, cutting some of the reasons why this type exists in the first place.
okay. I mean,
It also seems like it's another pit of failure, right? Wouldn't you have to call effectively dispose on the existing value before you override it?
No, like the idea is like if you just want to have a GC handle pointing to something that's kind of, you know, changing over time, you just have one GC handle and you always update the target to.
No, I meant if you don't make it settable, then you store, you know, a pin GC handle. Now you want to replace the target, and now you have to override the entire pin GC handle with a new pin GC handle.
Yeah.
And then you would have to call dispose on the existing one, presumably, right? So which seems worse than just setting the target.
So does changing the target on pinned GC handle reduce the pin count on the old target and increase it on the new one?
Yes. You know, it's kind of not that common, but yes, conceptually.
Yeah, I mean, like, if it's... I didn't want to say unpin it because it could have been pinned by other means, so...
Yeah. Yeah, I assume that the from int PTR and to int PTR methods would also be weak GC handle of T.
Yeah. I mean, it is unfortunate that you've made this be a... I understand why this is a static method, but the to int PTR means to call it, you have to say, you know, weak GC handle of foo dot to int PTR. This is the kind of place where we would generally avoid, like, we would put this on the non-generic type so you didn't have to specify the T. But
I mean, why not just an instance method?
Yeah, that was my question. For the two.
I think because Jan doesn't like instance methods on generics because they make his runtime bigger.
No, you know, the reason for this shape is like we have introduced this shape on a number of other types that are related to interop, you know, so it's just for consistency for what we have elsewhere. So
from a consistency perspective, there's also GC handle implements IEquatable of GC handle and their operators. Do we not care about any of that stuff?
I think we don't care.
So you never want to compare a thing to anything?
I mean, I think that looks like our normal. Every struct should be IEquatable of itself. Is what we have on GC handle. So I guess the question is here: do we believe that's true?
Yeah, if you only ever want to know whether it's not null, is allocated does that, I suppose. So I guess that's the way to do it.
Well, as allocated doesn't tell you if it's not null, right? It tells you if there's an underlying handle associated with it, or maybe I'm wrong. You could have is allocated true, but target be null, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
What does that even mean? You track the null pointer? Is that?
Is allocated refers to whether the underlying runtime has its special tracking set up for whatever this refers to, which could be null.
Huh. Okay.
Is target alive? It has the problem that it's like the race condition is like, the moment you check that is target alive, the very next moment the target can become
I loaded weak reference instead of weak reference at T.
Yeah, that's what was removed from weak reference and when it went to try get.
Yeah.
Try get target or something.
But this is kind of low level interrupt type. So
Yeah, in terms of consistency, I get this from NPDR and to NPDR, but I mean, depending on what T is, it's just a very verbose call then.
For a weak reference, is the T nullable or not?
I think for all of these, the where T : class should be where T : class ?
I just like. Can you have a weak reference to null?
Yes.
Okay. It feels like null's never going to go away, but sure.
and then I assume target doesn't have to be nullable, right?
Well, it does, because even if you use the non-null string, for example, if it was collected, you might get back. Oh, wait, you're talking about
well, unpinned. Like, I guess I don't know what we do for other things. If after you call dispose, presumably target is null.
We don't care about the state. We don't care about nullable references after dispose. In general, we say if you touch it after you've disposed, the contract doesn't matter. And with pinned, there shouldn't be any way for it to just go away. So
aside from you saying null bang.
But if target can't be null, that means you also can't accept a null value, right?
Well, I guess that part of the problem here is okay. So on some of our other types, is it weak reference? No, not weak reference. It's which one is it? Oh yeah, so like strong box of T, we basically have the value as a T ? even if the T provided wasn't, because if you have kind of a default instance, you might
Yeah.
get back null. So we have to make a judgment call about whether we want all of these targets to be question mark or not.
So I thought our position for structs was we generally don't care about the default state. Otherwise, all object references and all structs would forever be nullable, which is not that useful.
So our policy has basically been based on a judgment call based on how are they most likely to be used. Like there's the interface map or mapping type that's a struct. We decided to make all of its public members non-nullable because you never create those yourselves. You never have a default of, rarely have a default of one of those. You basically just use the result that it's returned to you from the method that you call in the framework. And so we said, all right, for the 99% case, it's going to be right. But my concern with something like GC handle of T is you might have one of these as a field, and if you just walk up to it, you're going to be using the default.
Finds exception.
Oh, really? So it checks if it's not allocated?
Like yeah, basically. So the target, you can only call target after you properly constructed one of these and before you disposed it. Like
okay, so target will throw an exception if you didn't call the constructor.
Yeah.
All right, so then non-nullable is fine.
Okay. See, I feel like that violates some aspect of property design, but I don't know that I care.
I mean, it's the same with a mutable array. If you index into a default instance, you basically get a null reference exception. You don't get a more intelligent.
We have a guideline somewhere that says properties should not throw. So.
Yes, I'm just saying, like in cases of structs,
right,
for efficiency reasons, we have broken that because otherwise you have inlining issues and the code gets bigger and blah blah blah.
Right.
So we should also remove the question mark from line 11.
Thank you. Oh, and we got rid of this.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm dumb again, but what does it now mean to say class question mark but then take a T? That means
it's the same question markiness as your class.
Yeah, the T colon class question mark means that it's okay for someone to create a GC handle open angle bracket string question mark. It's basically saying the T is allowed to be nullable.
And if I omit the question mark on the generic, then I can't?
If you say where T colon class without a question mark, then if someone's tried to say new GC handle open angle bracket string question mark, it would get a warning.
Oh, okay.
I have a question. We removed the target property on the weak GC handle, which I understand for getting the target, but we also can no longer set it now. Do we want to add just the setter or some method to set the setter?
Yeah, so weak reference of T has set target, so.
I'd also be fine. I mean, I'm happy to go either way, but I'd also be fine if we just wanted the T question mark target.
For the weak GC
just
handle?
Property. Yeah, public T question mark target get set.
And if
it was collected, it returns null.
Fair
It's effectively
enough.
That's effectively what we have now on lines 40 and 41. We're forcing you to check in a different way. We're forcing you to say if try get target rather than storing target into a local and saying if target is null.
The only problem is the code people provide is going to be handle dot target is not null, and then you access target again, and then between those two calls it might have disappeared, right?
That's the argument for the try get target method.
Yeah.
Yeah, because really you should save it to a local and then only inspect the local, because reading the property twice is dangerous.
Right, but that's, I would argue, is actually, in that case I actually prefer 4041 over 43. Because 43 seems like a bit of a pit of failure.
With 43, do you not also have potentially like a small perf issue if you have like a weak GC handle of a non-seal type? If you were to do, which I imagine people would commonly do, like something like if handle dot target is the T value, then that would not be able to be optimized to just a direct check, but it would have to be like the more costly check to consider derived types too, right? Whereas try get target will always give you the instance immediately with no type checks.
What? I'm not understanding why wouldn't they just have is not null or does not equal null?
Because I just very commonly see people use this pattern because it's convenient, because you also declare the local in the same statement.
Oh, the pattern.
Yeah.
So if
I mean, you can do that with
is foo.
Yeah.
As their null check.
Yes. Or is brackets, close brackets. That's the same.
Yeah.
Why would there be an extra type check there?
Because if I'm just if not mistaken, sorry, go ahead.
If you use the exact type of the field, there won't be an extra type check. It's just a null check.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of arrays. Where you can't store the the base type of the derived type.
I mean, to personally, given the complexities that are weak handle, I prefer 4041 over 43.
Yep. Same.
Is the question mark after the T redundant when you already have the nullable constraint? Like T has to be nullable, right?
No. T can be nullable.
Okay.
Yeah, line 35 says that T is allowed to be nullable, but not that it's required to be nullable.
Okay, thank you. Missed that.
But
it has been what, 3 years, and we still don't understand our annotations all the time. It's
trial and error. No.
Yeah. But given that I see the pit of failure of asking if it's not null, and then a GC collection before your next line, you now read it again, which is what you don't want to do.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the pit of failure. The flip side is there's this weird property format with line 4041.
It is, but I think to me that's less of a concern because you really don't want people to use the property. So it's you want them to use the local, and this kind of forces them to use a local.
Yes, it's part of the benefit of we made weak GC handle its own type.
Yeah.
Minor tweak, line 40 should be maybe null when false.
It says that.
You also have not null when true.
Okay, I copied that off of weak reference. So if it only wants one.
That's on weak reference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I 100%. I just straight up copied try get target off of weak reference at T.
And it kind of makes sense, right? Because the inverse doesn't hold, right?
No, well we have this constrained to be class, and it will never return a non-null.
So weak reference says it can't store null.
Well, no, it can, but it can become.
Yeah, I would not put any stock in me not saying class question mark. I might not be able to.
It says.
I think this should
says
just
class
be
question
not
mark.
null when true out T question mark.
Okay. The real definition is class question mark.
Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense then.
You can go in and fix up weak reference later, but I think this should just be not null when true out T question mark. Basically saying that if
it can store null,
but it won't ever return null. Try get target will return false if the target is null. That's the purpose of try get target.
Okay, so if you make a weak GC handle storing null, try get target
will return false.
returns false. Okay.
Whereas target, the property, would return null.
Right.
Wait,
Okay, so
I
you
thought
can
the
make a
whole
weak
point is
reference
you
of null
could-
by saying I'm not tracking anything yet, but I might. Okay.
Is allocated might be true, but try
Yeah.
get target will return false.
Right, because basically it's allocated the weak handle for the GC handle is basically tracking the weak handle, and this is modeled as reaching through the weak handle.
So if I call
Yes.
set target null, which is allowed, right, because of the question mark, but
Try
not,
get target will return false.
But
Okay.
is allocated will still return true.
got it.
You
Hey,
have
the-
a
the
handle.
tar-
Go ahead, Jan.
The target setters, both the property and the set target method can be read-only too. I know it's kind of weird, but it's kind of
Yeah.
how it works.
Right. So if you pass the GC handle by value into another method and they call set target, it impacts the one in the previous method. Because
Yeah, so it's
because
kind
the
of
field is an
interesting.
entry in a table and you're changing the thing in the table.
Yeah.
All right.
So other question is, when I call set target on the default instance, does that throw, or is it equivalent to calling the constructor?
It will throw.
Okay.
Because
I think
his allocated is
set-
false.
Sergio has remarks about the exception throwing behavior.
Yeah, there were some notes in the proposal.
I don't know why you can mark the property as read only when you have a setter though.
It just means the setter's read only. It's given the same rules, or the compiler will enforce that it didn't assign a field, and he won't. He's going to assign something in a dictionary somewhere.
So if that's the case, why is the struct not read only? What actually modifies the struct then? I guess dispose. does,
Dispose.
right?
Yeah.
Just want to check again. So the get hash code and equals methods on these types, the ones from object, what will they do?
Well, they will kind of do the right thing, except that they will be slow. Like if we care, like it won't cost much to just implement equal on these structs too, for completeness if we can. I don't have an opinion.
So you don't expect people to put this as a key in a dictionary or in a hash table or a set or anything like that?
Yeah, I think it's very unusual to use the GC handlers as a key. So we kind of typically, if you want a key in a dictionary, you want kind of the thing that you probably want the thing that the GC handle points to, but somebody might want to do that.
Yeah, I guess I'm okay with slow. I would be less okay with like something really bad happens when you do that. So. Yeah.
There we go. I wrote it down. Consider.
Something we haven't discussed yet are the extension methods, whether we like the names.
Yeah. So my question is, do we have a better name for the type that's holding them? And my guess is no. But
My other question is like, where does this type live? Because if it's in the same namespace, why are we making them extension methods in the first
Because
place?
they're specialized on the parameter
Oh,
type.
I see. Gotcha.
Extension extension for specialization.
Didn't we call them differently? Doesn't string have the same thing, like get address of first char or something?
Yeah, I was gonna say the only adder of I'm seeing is adder of pinned array element. Because somewhere we have the get array data. Yeah, memory marshal, it has get array data reference, which is ref instead of pointer.
And also the existing GC handler has other of pinned object. It's instance method, but it's kind of similar on that.
Interesting that we have an instance adder of pinned object on GC handle, but you didn't want that on pinned GC handle.
That's also kind of nice to have thing. I think the issue discussion has it mentioned that if you wanted more of these other offs, that the other of pinned of the other of objects on pinned GC handle would be something we might want to add.
And that would be different than converting the pinned GC handle to an int pitter? Like it's a different answer than this?
Yes, it returns kind of the pointer inside into the object that's where the payload starts. I think the pinned is redundant there since the GC handle is pinned GC handle.
So target address?
I think it should follow the same naming pattern as the extension methods. So, we can call all of them other of something, other of pin something, or other of something.
Okay, because so the adder of pinned is I see, and then otherwise address looks more high level and complicated and not like a pointer.
Maybe other of object would be better for consistent. If we wanted that method to do exact same thing as the existing method on GC handle, maybe other of object would be better so that there's like same name or same ish name.
Yeah, I mean that's why I was just asserting we should just call it adder of pinned object, because it's telling you it's exactly the same thing from GC handle.
Oh.
It won't throw if it's not pinned, because on this type it is pinned. I mean, actually it will, because it'll throw if it's allocated as false. But sure, adder of object, which is a little weird, but yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
Small question: should the type arguments in the addr array data and string data extensions be nullable? Like that pin GC handle, should that be T array question mark and string question mark?
You can't have nullable pointers. Oh, you mean the arguments of the GC handle?
No,
itself?
in the handle parameter, yeah. Because I think one of the notes we did is that it's fine to call that on a null target, and it will just give back a null pointer. So
that case,
without
yeah.
null, without warn, otherwise, if you try to call it on a pin.gc handle where the type argument were nullable.
I buy that, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think we need T question mark array because that question mark would come from the type.
Yeah.
So we're just saying the array itself was allowed to be null. I think. Yeah, I mean, the only people who are going to see these atterofs are people using GC handle, and GC handle already has atterofs. So the existing GC handle already has atterofs. So while I don't like it, especially because it doesn't have a verb, it's probably fine.
For the array data one, isn't T basically a struct? You can't. Can you even have T to be a class?
Oh, pretty.
Yeah.
With the latest C#, you can have like string star. It's kind of
Okay, I didn't know you could do
expert
that.
level.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Then
Alright.
I guess that works, yeah.
And if you were to create a different name for the other offs, like what would that be? Like
For the suffix or the prefix?
Because the array data and string data seem fine. It would just be like,
Yeah.
get array data pointer instead of adder of array data.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I mean, if you want to change the suffix, I would go with first element or something. But like I think array data and string data seems fine to me.
Like,
honestly, I think
that's what I
address
would
of
call
array data is probably, I would like that more over the pointer thing.
Fair enough. Like, it just doesn't have a verb.
Do we particularly care about the consistency with other older APIs with respect to the adr abbreviation rather than just doing, like, why not just get address of array data?
That works as well, yeah.
Just thinking of the naming guidelines that suggest not to shorten.
And this one can be address of object data, so that it's not just an object.
Yeah. Yeah, and then if you want to, Jeremy, prefix it with get, and then you have your verb.
I mean, if we want, I'm. It is a very niche type, so I'm.
Yeah, I don't care. Actually.
Willing to hold my nose a little bit.
Works.
I do like the get, but yeah, I'm fine with either.
Right. I'll slap on some gets. So just that would be, char star handle dot get address of string data, which looks fine.
Tells you what it does.
Yeah, but again, that's whether so. Get address of string data, get string data address, get string data pointer. It's fine.
Do we care about the difference between array data and string data, or do we just say data?
I mean, right now we have the three. We have string data, array data, and object data, and I think it's clear that they're different.
Alrighty then.
What's one last small question? Should that be the get address of object data? Should that be void star? Since we've been pushing people towards using real pointers lately, given that int PTR is technically a number.
Now that we've unified it with inint, it is a number, but for a long time, Anders insisted it wasn't. I think this can be void star. I was gonna write T star, and then actually thought T star is not allowed. So, but apparently it is. So I don't know if we want void star or T star here.
It should be void star.
Okay.
Just to understand, why should it be void star and not T star? Is that pointing to a slightly different location or something?
T star is correct, right? When you have like, imagine you have a class with two integer fields. This will return pointer to the first integer field.
Oh, right, because it's the object data. Right. Thank you. Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. And then just curious, the size of these is inint, or how big's the struct?
Yeah, it's wrapper around int ptr.
Yeah. So they're all pointer sized, so they're all within our 24 byte guideline. All right.
And then the only question I had is like for the inptr one, why do we use inptr then for the handle itself and not like a pointer? Because that's just what we do.
It'd be weird if we called it from int ptr and it took a void star.
I think that's because it's meant to be like an opaque handle. That was my understanding.
It's the same reason why when we discussed some of the new COM APIs, we decided to take int ptr there as well, because there's so much legacy CRUD that requires taking int ptr that it's convenient to return it in some of the places that necessitate it, rather than returning void star and requiring them to then cast to int ptr in the use places.
Gotcha.
We had some back and forth on it, and we ultimately landed on just being consistent with the primary use case for those, rather than causing those users unnecessary pain.
Works for me.
So, sounds like the context in which they would call it has legacy reasons.
I'm really sure about the static to inptr, given that you now always have to type it out, the T.
Well, yeah, I'm not worried about the typing. You know, this is like interop. It tends to be verbose. You know, if we kind of want to switch to a new, different pattern, you know, like there are like at least, you know, I think 5 types that use this from intptr to nptr pattern. Yes, they are not generic, but you know, you still have to type it for them.
Yeah, I mean, you're the primary customer. If you're cool with that, then that's what we do.
Yep. So it would just be, you know, weak GC handle of string dot. Which looks unnecessarily verbose, but it reminds you you're doing interrupt.
And the longer and more verbose it is, the less unsafe code we can churn out per year.
Exactly. Alright, and then I guess we changed adder of to get address of as a prefix.
I noticed that some of the other similar types have an explicit operator from inputter. I assume you don't want that. I mean, it would be shorter than writing out all the generic cruft.
No, we just said we like the longer.
Okay, fair enough.
And the ones that I'm seeing that have the to and from pattern are like runtime field handle, and I don't see casting on those. So, all right. Well, that 10 minutes of overtime was an hour of overtime, but I'm happy enough. So GC handle of T can be constructed, pin GC handle of T can be constructed, weak GC handle of T can be constructed with a defaulted value of whether or not resurrection is there, and it defaults to false. We can get rid of the default if people prefer, but it felt like what I was hearing is resurrection is rare, so I defaulted it. All right. Boop. And the list goes to 0. Eventually. Caching. There we go. All right. With only a bonus hour, we cleared the list. And thanks everyone for joining us. We had some good comments, and thanks everyone for joining in person and kicking the new year off to a good start with API review. And we'll see you next week here at our same .NET time on our same .NET channel. Till then, Auf Wiedersehen.
Have a good rest of your day. Bye, folks.